Some battles are lost because the enemy is brilliant. These were lost because someone trusted a terrible map, forgot the ladders, attacked the wrong hill, ignored bees, or looked at mud and said, "Yes, my armored cavalry will love this." Today, we have 33 battles lost in the dumbest way possible, where history stopped being a grand strategy game and turned into a group project led by the least reliable person in the room. 1. Operation Cottage in 1943 was meant to be a tough Allied assault on Kiska, a Japanese-held island in the Aleutians. The Americans and Canadians landed in fog, cold, wind, and pure nervous electricity, expecting machine guns behind every rock. Troops crept forward, weapons ready, hearts pounding, probably imagining a brutal island fight. Tiny issue. The Japanese had already left 3 weeks earlier. They evacuated quietly under cover of bad weather, basically deleting themselves from the battlefield before the Allies arrived. But nobody knew that for sure, so the invasion force attacked an empty island with maximum commitment. In the confusion, fog, mines, traps, and friendly fire caused real casualties. It was like breaking into a haunted house, fighting the curtains, losing to the staircase, and then discovering the owner moved out last month. The enemy's smartest move was not being there. 2. The Battle of Fishguard in 1797 was France's last invasion of mainland Britain, and somehow it sounds like a tavern story told by a drunk uncle with suspicious confidence. French troops landed in Wales, hoping to start panic, rebellion, and maybe a glorious campaign. Instead, discipline collapsed almost immediately because some of the soldiers found wine from a wrecked Portuguese ship. Nothing says serious military operation like stopping your invasion because the beach came with free alcohol. Soon, many of the invaders were too drunk to conquer a sandwich, never mind Britain. Local Welsh civilians helped pressure them, and women in tall black hats and red cloaks reportedly added to the confusion, looking from a distance like British troops. So the French invasion did not fail against a massive army. It failed against bad discipline, strong wine, and Welsh women who basically walked in like, "Gentlemen, pack it up." 3. At Tanga in 1914, British forces attacked German East Africa with the confidence of people who had not yet met the local wildlife department. General Aitken underestimated the German defenders, rushed his operation, and ignored warnings about the terrain and, more importantly, the bees. Not symbolic bees, actual angry bees. During the fighting, disturbed hives unleashed swarms so furious they might as well have had tiny helmets and a formal alliance with Germany. British troops were already struggling with poor coordination, bad intelligence, and stubborn defenders under Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. Then nature joined the battle and made everything worse. Soldiers ran from gunfire, confusion, and stinging insects at the same time, which is not exactly the majestic imperial image on recruitment posters. The Germans fought cleverly, yes, but the bees added the kind of chaos no staff officer can draw properly on a map without crying. 4. Singapore in 1942 was supposed to be the great British fortress in Asia, the so-called Gibraltar of the East. That sounds impressive, like a giant locked door with cannons. Unfortunately, someone forgot that doors are less useful when the enemy comes through the back garden. British defense planning focused heavily on a naval attack, expecting Japan to approach from the sea like a polite villain following the brochure. Instead, Japanese forces swept down the Malay Peninsula through jungle, speed, infiltration, and bicycles. Yes, bicycles. The empire had big coastal guns and a proud reputation, while the Japanese arrived from the landward side with mobility and terrifying momentum. It was not as simple as the guns pointed the wrong way, but the strategic blindness was very real. Singapore fell because the defenders prepared for the dramatic attack they expected, not the practical one their enemy actually used. History's lesson: the jungle also has a front door. 5. Spion Kop in 1900 was one of those battles where everyone tried to be brave, and the map quietly betrayed them like a cheap umbrella in a storm. During the Second Boer War, British troops climbed a hill at night, believing they had seized the important high ground. It was dark, foggy, confusing, and full of the kind of confidence that only exists before sunrise. Then morning arrived, the mist lifted, and the British realized the awful punchline: they had not captured the dominant summit they thought they had. They were on an exposed, awkward part of the ridge, while Boer marksmen held higher ground around them. That is not "we control the hill." That is, we accidentally rented the balcony below the sniper section. The British had done the exhausting climbing part correctly, and the choosing the right hill part disastrously. Sometimes victory is uphill both ways, and you still pick the wrong uphill. 6. Agincourt in 1415 was a spectacular reminder that expensive armor does not make mud respect you. The French had noble cavalry, elite men-at-arms, numbers, prestige, and enough aristocratic confidence to fill a cathedral. The English had longbows, defensive stakes, and a rain-soaked battlefield that had turned into medieval glue. French knights in heavy armor advanced across narrow, churned ground where every step became a negotiation with the earth. Horses slipped, men crowded together, and anyone who fell had the mobility of an overturned iron wardrobe. The English archers weakened and disrupted them, but the mud did a shocking amount of unpaid labor. French nobles expected glory, and instead got a full-body wrestling match with wet farmland. Agincourt was not just Henry V versus France. It was also France versus soil, and soil won with embarrassing efficiency. 7. The Battle of the Crater. In 1864 began with a genuinely smart idea, which makes the disaster even more painful. Union soldiers dug a tunnel under Confederate lines at Petersburg, filled it with explosives, and blew a massive hole in the defenses. So far, brilliant. The explosion shocked the defenders and opened a chance to break through. Then command looked at the giant smoking crater and apparently thought, "What a lovely place to send infantry." Instead of moving around the hole and exploiting the gap, many Union troops went down into it. Down. Into the pit. A pit surrounded by enemy positions. Once inside, they were crowded, confused, and trapped below ground level, while Confederates recovered and fired down at them. It was like inventing a door, then choosing to crawl into the chimney. Engineering did its job beautifully. Leadership then grabbed victory by the collar and pushed it into a ditch. 8. Isandlwana in 1879 is often lazily summarized as rifles versus spears, but the real story is much more embarrassing for the British command. They had modern firearms, but they also had overconfidence, poor camp security, scattered forces, and a deep misunderstanding of the Zulu army's speed and discipline. Ammunition supply became a serious problem under pressure, with boxes and procedures slowing distribution when soldiers needed cartridges fast. The famous screwdriver detail is likely exaggerated, but the broader reality is still ridiculous enough. Bureaucracy and bad preparation interfered with survival. Meanwhile, the Zulu army moved with coordination, courage, and tactical intelligence. The British treated the camp like a temporary administrative inconvenience. The Zulu treated it like a target. Modern weapons are powerful, but they are less impressive when your supply system behaves like a sleepy clerk guarding office stationery. 9. In 413 before Christ, the Athenian commander Nicias found himself trapped at Syracuse during Athens's disastrous Sicilian Expedition. Athens had already made the bold decision to fight a huge campaign far from home while still tangled in the Peloponnesian War, because apparently one crisis was too boring. After years of setbacks, disease, and bad choices, retreat finally became the sensible option. Then a lunar eclipse happened. Nicias, deeply superstitious, saw the darkened moon as a terrible omen and delayed departure. That delay gave Syracuse time to close the trap. The Athenian fleet was blocked, the army was crushed, and one of the greatest military expeditions in Greek history turned into a catastrophe. Nicias looked at the sky and basically said, "The moon seems upset. Let's wait." The moon did not command the enemy, but it did accidentally become Athens' worst military advisor. 10. At Adwa in 1896, Italy expected a colonial victory over Ethiopia and instead received a very public geography lesson with casualties, panic, and national humiliation attached. General Oreste Baratieri sent Italian forces into the Ethiopian highlands with poor intelligence, divided columns and maps so outdated they might as well have had "good luck tourist" written on them. His troops moved through rough terrain in darkness, lost contact with each other, and became vulnerable one column at a time. Emperor Menelik II and Empress Taitu had gathered a large, determined, well-led Ethiopian army that knew the land and the stakes. The result was a crushing Italian defeat, not the easy imperial triumph Rome wanted to print in newspapers. Bad maps, colonial arrogance, and divided forces formed a perfect triangle of stupidity. Adwa proved that underestimating your enemy is not a strategy. It is a receipt for disaster. 11. The Battle of New Orleans in 1815 was already strange because the peace treaty ending the War of 1812 had been signed before the battle, but news moved slowly because history did not yet have group chats. British General Edward Pakenham ordered troops to attack Andrew Jackson's fortified American line. The plan required infantry to cross open ground under heavy fire, reach defensive works, and climb them. For that, they needed ladders and fascines, the basic equipment for assaulting defenses. Somehow, those crucial items were not where they needed to be when the attack began. So soldiers advanced bravely into deadly fire without the tools required to complete the job. That is not a battle plan. That is asking men to solve a wall through positive thinking. The British Army was disciplined and experienced, but even the best troops cannot climb a fortification with vibes and regret. 12. Fort Donelson in 1862 became a leadership disaster so awkward it feels like command responsibility was being passed around like a hot potato covered in gunpowder. Confederate forces were trapped by Ulysses S. Grant, and after a failed breakout attempt, the senior commanders faced a terrible decision. John Floyd did not want to be captured, so he fled. Gideon Pillow also escaped because apparently the ship of command was sinking and the officers had discovered the lifeboats first. That left Simon Bolivar Buckner stuck with the fort, the exhausted troops, and the unpleasant job of surrendering. Grant demanded unconditional surrender, and Buckner had little choice. The Confederate Army did not simply lose ground. Its chain of command evaporated in layers. If leadership is the spine of an army, Fort Donelson had the posture of a wet noodle. 13. The battle on Lake Pepus in 1242, often called the Battle on the Ice, is famous for the dramatic image of heavily armored knights plunging through frozen water. That version is probably exaggerated by later legend, because medieval storytelling loved adding blockbuster effects before cinema existed. But even without mass ice sinking, the tactical problem remains wonderfully bad. The Teutonic Knights and their allies faced Alexander Nevsky's forces on difficult icy terrain near the lake. Heavy troops, uncertain footing, spring conditions, and an enemy prepared to use the landscape made the battlefield a risky choice. Once the knights lost momentum, their armor and formation became liabilities. They were not charging across a clean tournament field. They were trying to operate heavy medieval hardware on nature's least trustworthy floor. Whether or not the ice swallowed them dramatically, the lesson is clear. When the ground itself feels temporary, maybe do not schedule the battle there. 14. Arthur St. Clair's defeat at the Wabash in 1791 was one of the worst disasters in United States Army history, and the setup reads like a checklist of things not to do in hostile territory. St. Clair led a poorly trained, sick, tired force into land controlled by the Western Confederacy. His men were exhausted, morale was low, and the campaign was already wobbling. Then the army made camp without proper defensive preparation or alertness, in enemy territory, at night, with danger nearby. That is not confidence. That is leaving your front door open in a wolf sanctuary. Early in the morning, native forces under leaders including Little Turtle and Blue Jacket attacked with devastating effect. The American camp collapsed into chaos. St. Clair did not just underestimate his opponents, he underestimated the basic military concept of someone should probably stay awake. 15. Luigi Cadorna at the Isonzo during World War I seemed determined to prove that if a frontal assault fails horribly, the correct solution is to repeat it until geography feels sorry for you. Italy fought Austria-Hungary along brutal mountain and river fronts where the terrain was already hostile before anyone fired a shot. Cadorna repeatedly ordered attacks against strong defensive positions, often across exposed ground, into artillery, machine guns, wire, and mountains that had clearly chosen a side. There were 11 battles of the Isonzo before the disaster at Caporetto shattered the Italian front. 11. At that point, even the mountain must have been thinking, "You again?" Cadorna blamed soldiers for lacking spirit, which is convenient when your strategy is basically headbutting stone and complaining the skull is unpatriotic. Courage was not the missing ingredient. Adaptation was. 16. In the year 9, Publius Quinctilius Verus marched 3 Roman legions into the Teutoburg forest while trusting Arminius, a Germanic noble who had served Rome and understood Roman methods. Unfortunately, Arminius was not just a helpful local guide with charming regional knowledge. He was secretly organizing a rebellion. That is the kind of detail you want to discover before following him into a dark forest with 3 legions stretched into a vulnerable line. The Romans moved through rain, mud, and dense woodland, losing the formation discipline that made them terrifying in open terrain. Germanic warriors attacked from cover, struck the scattered column, and kept pressure on until the legions collapsed. Rome had conquered cities, kingdoms, and proud armies. Then it trusted the wrong guy with directions and lost 3 legions in the trees. Worst guided tour in imperial history. 17. Gideon Pillow at Fort Donelson deserves a special place in the museum of almost escaped, then changed his mind. In February 1862, Confederate forces were trapped by Grant's army. A breakout attack actually succeeded in pushing Union troops back and opening a possible escape route. This was the moment. The road was open. The army had one job: leave. Not hold a meeting, not admire the effort, not emotionally process the day. Just leave. Instead, Pillow decided the troops should return to their trenches, apparently believing the attack had done enough for now. Enough for what, exactly? A participation certificate? By going back, the Confederates trapped themselves again. Grant recovered, tightened his grip, and the fort surrendered. Pillow had briefly found the exit, then told everyone to walk back into the burning building because the hallway looked promising. 18. General William Shafter in Cuba. In 1898, commanded United States forces during the Spanish-American War while struggling badly with poor health and extreme weight. Reports described him as so heavy and unwell that moving around the battlefield was extremely difficult. He often directed operations from the rear, including from a tent or wagon, while heat, disease, bad roads, and confusion turned the campaign into a sweaty administrative nightmare. To be fair, the conditions were brutal for everyone. But Shafter's command style did not help. Orders were often unclear, coordination was messy, and subordinates had to improvise constantly. The United States still won around Santiago, but the victory was not exactly a triumph of smooth management. It was more like success dragged itself across the finish line, while headquarters misplaced the clipboard. Shafter did not lose the campaign, but he showed how victory can survive despite leadership trying to trip over it. 19. Guy de Lusignan at Hattin in 1187 gave the Crusader states a devastating lesson in one of history's most advanced military technologies: drinking water. Saladin threatened Tiberias, and the Crusader army marched out across dry, hot terrain in the middle of summer. The route was dangerous, supplies were poor, and access to water was controlled by Saladin's forces. This was not a minor logistical issue. In the desert, water is not a comfort item. It is the difference between nights and slow-roasting metal furniture. The Crusaders wore heavy armor, carried banners, and tried to keep moving while being harassed by mounted troops and smoke. By the time they reached the horns of Hattin, they were exhausted, thirsty, and trapped. Saladin destroyed the army, and Jerusalem fell soon after. The Crusaders brought courage and steel. Saladin brought strategy, patience, and the suspiciously useful idea that humans need water. 20. At Prairie Grove in 1862, Confederate General Thomas Hindman fought Union forces in Arkansas in a battle that was fierce, confused, and almost painfully close. Hindman had moved aggressively and attacked hard, trying to knock Union forces back and regain control in the region. The fighting was brutal, and both armies were worn down. Here is the maddening part. Union ammunition was running dangerously low. The enemy was not exactly sitting on endless supplies. They were close to serious trouble, but Hindman did not fully realize just how strained they were. Instead of pressing or holding firmly, he withdrew during the night, giving up the field and ending Confederate hopes of dominating northwest Arkansas. It was not a formal "oops, we surrender," but emotionally it belongs in the same cupboard. Imagine leaving a poker table because you think you are beaten, while the other player is hiding 2 napkins and a nervous smile. 21. Stirling Bridge in 1297 is a beautiful example of how a narrow bridge can turn a large army into a terrible queue. The English under the Earl of Surrey faced Scottish forces led by William Wallace and Andrew Moray. The English had numbers and resources, but instead of using those advantages properly, they sent troops across the River Forth over a narrow bridge, only a small portion at a time. That meant the army did not arrive as one overwhelming force. It arrived in convenient slices, like battlefield deli meat. The Scots waited until enough English soldiers had crossed to be isolated, then attacked before the rest could support them. Panic followed, and the bridge became a bottleneck of disaster. The English did not just lose to Scottish courage, they lost to basic traffic management. Wallace and Moray looked at the bridge and said, "Thank you, this will portion the enemy nicely." 22. The charge of the Light Brigade in 1854 was one of the most famous examples of courage being sent in the completely wrong direction. During the Crimean War, Lord Raglan wanted cavalry to stop Russian troops from removing captured guns. But his order was unclear. The terrain limited visibility, and the message passed through several commanders like a cursed note in a very expensive game of telephone. Lord Lucan and Lord Cardigan interpreted the instruction as a direct charge down a valley into Russian artillery. So the Light Brigade rode forward with incredible discipline and bravery, straight into cannon fire from the front and both sides. The soldiers were not foolish. They followed orders. The problem was that the orders had all the precision of someone pointing vaguely at a kitchen fire and yelling, "Deal with that one." The result was heroic, tragic, and completely avoidable. 23. George McClellan in 1862 received one of the luckiest intelligence gifts in military history, a copy of Robert E. Lee's plans. Special Order 191 was found wrapped around cigars because apparently someone in the Confederate Army looked at top-secret strategy and thought, perfect packaging. This should have been McClellan's moment. Lee's army was divided. The enemy's movements were exposed. A faster commander might have slammed the opportunity shut like a trap. But McClellan had a remarkable talent for turning urgency into furniture. He moved cautiously, delayed, and continued to overestimate Confederate strength. The result was the Battle of Antietam, terrible and bloody, but not the decisive destruction of Lee's army that might have happened. Finding the enemy's plans is amazing. Using them while they are still relevant is the advanced level McClellan somehow kept skipping. 24. The Battle of the Cauca River. In 1223 was the moment the Rus's princes and their allies met the Mongols and discovered that teamwork was not optional. The Mongols were disciplined, mobile, and extremely good at making enemies chase them into bad decisions. The Russes and Cuman forces had plenty of warriors, but unity was a disaster. Different princes mistrusted each other, argued over leadership, and attacked without proper coordination. In other words, they approached one of history's most dangerous military machines with the emotional maturity of rival cousins, fighting over inheritance furniture. The Mongols used a feigned retreat, drawing the disorganized coalition out of position, then turned and crushed them in pieces. The Rus did not fail because they lacked bravery. They failed because everyone wanted glory, nobody wanted teamwork, and the Mongols were more than happy to punish that attitude professionally. 25. In 1982, Argentine leader Leopoldo Galtieri invaded the Falkland Islands while apparently betting that Britain would be too tired, too far away, or too practical to respond militarily. This is a dangerous assumption to make about a country with ships, pride, and a government that does not want to look like it misplaced an overseas territory. Argentina seized the islands, expecting a quick patriotic boost and a political win at home. Instead, Britain assembled a task force and sailed thousands of miles into the South Atlantic. The war was difficult, costly, and dangerous, but Argentina's central gamble collapsed. Britain did come all that way. Galtieri's calculation was basically, surely they will not travel across the world for this. And Britain replied in naval form, we packed a lunch. The invasion was meant to strengthen his regime. It helped destroy it. 26. Emperor Valens at Adrianople in 378 had a very simple option available. Wait for reinforcements from the Western Emperor Gratian. They were not imaginary reinforcements, they were actually coming, but Valens wanted the victory for himself, because apparently sharing glory was a fate worse than military disaster. He marched against the Goths with tired troops, poor intelligence, and a dangerously incomplete understanding of the enemy force. The Roman army attacked before it was ready, in heat and confusion, and then Gothic cavalry returned at the worst possible moment. The Roman line collapsed, and Valens was killed. Adrianople became one of the most shocking defeats in Roman history. All because an emperor saw patience standing there with a sensible plan and said, no, I would prefer a personal branding opportunity. Rome did not just lose a battle, it lost to ego with a crown. 27. General Edward Braddock at the Monongahela in 1755 marched into the North American forest as if the trees were legally required to behave like a European battlefield. During the French and Indian War, Braddock led British regulars and colonial troops toward Fort Duquesne. Then, French and native forces ambushed them using cover, movement, and irregular tactics perfectly suited to the terrain. Braddock tried to maintain rigid formations, bright uniforms, drums, and classic order in dense woods where visibility was poor and enemies were not politely standing in lines. The result was confusion, panic, and heavy losses. Officers became targets, men fired wildly, and the army's structure fell apart. George Washington was there and somehow survived, probably taking notes titled, "Please do not fight forests like ballrooms." Braddock had courage and discipline. What he did not have was the ability to admit the forest had different rules. 28. The Battle of the Golden Spurs. In 1302 was supposed to be an easy lesson from French knights to Flemish commoners. The French elite cavalry expected peasants and townsmen to crumble under the sight of noble horsemen because medieval aristocrats had a charming habit of confusing social rank with physics. The Flemish infantry chose their ground carefully near Kortrijk, using ditches, streams, muddy terrain, and strong defensive formations with pikes and heavy spiked clubs called goedendags. The French cavalry charged anyway, because nothing says elite decision-making like galloping into hidden wet obstacles at full confidence. Horses stumbled, formations broke, and armored knights became trapped at close range. Flemish infantry then finished the fight brutally. Afterward, golden spurs were taken from fallen French nobles, giving the battle its name. It was a medieval customer review. 1 star, cavalry did not handle mud well. 29. Bladensburg in 1814 was the battle that opened the road to Washington, and William Wender's defensive arrangements did not exactly scream capital city protection plan. During the War of 1812, British forces advanced toward Washington, and Winder positioned American troops in ways that left units spread out, poorly coordinated, and unable to support each other effectively. Militia morale was shaky, command was uncertain, and when the British attacked, the American line broke in stages. The retreat became so embarrassing it was mocked as the Bladensburg Races. That nickname tells you the vibe. British troops entered Washington and burned public buildings, including the White House and the Capitol. Winder did not lose because the British had supernatural powers. He lost because his army was arranged like separate pieces of furniture in a room nobody planned. Armies, as it turns out, function better when they can hear orders and help each other. 30. Majuba Hill. In 1881, looked at first like a British advantage. General George Pomeroy Cawley occupied the top of the hill during the First Boer War, and high ground is usually the kind of thing commanders enjoy having. It gives visibility, protection, and a chance to control the fight. But Cawley made a baffling choice. He did not properly entrench or prepare defensive positions. The British stayed exposed on top, while Boer marksmen climbed carefully from below using cover and accurate fire. The Boers were excellent shots, calm, patient, and well adapted to the terrain. The British position slowly transformed from commanding height into very visible shooting platform. It is one thing to take a hill. It is another thing to sit on it like a decorative statue and hope bullets respect altitude. Majuba proved that high ground without preparation is just a taller mistake. 31. Enver Pasha at Sarikamish in 1914 planned a bold Ottoman offensive against Russia in the Caucasus. And bold is a generous word here. The operation required soldiers to march through brutal winter mountains, often without proper clothing, supplies, food, shelter, or logistical support. Enver imagined a dramatic encirclement and a glorious victory. The Caucasus winter imagined something else entirely. Ottoman troops froze, starved, collapsed from exhaustion, and died in enormous numbers before strategy could even pretend to matter. This is not a funny human tragedy, and the suffering was horrific. But the decision-making was so reckless it deserves cold, hard judgment. Enver treated winter like a scenic background for ambition. Winter treated his army like a paperwork error to be erased. Sarikamish was not just defeat by Russia. It was defeat by logistics, weather, arrogance, and the belief that uniforms are somehow optional in freezing mountains. 32. General William Elphinstone's retreat from Kabul in 1842 is one of the most infamous disasters in British imperial history, and almost every decision seems to arrive wearing a sign that says, "This will age badly." After the British position in Afghanistan collapsed, Elphinstone trusted promises of safe passage and led around 16,000 soldiers, camp followers, and civilians out of Kabul in the dead of winter. They moved through mountain passes with weak protection, poor supplies, freezing weather, and enemies attacking from the heights. The column disintegrated under cold, hunger, fear, and constant pressure. Command was indecisive, negotiations failed, and survival became a nightmare. From the main column, Dr. William Brydon famously reached Jalalabad as the lone European survivor. Elphinstone's retreat shows what happens when weak leadership, false trust, terrible weather, and mountain warfare combine into one long disaster. It was not an exit, it was a collapse with footsteps. 33. Santa Anna at San Jacinto in 1836 had been pursuing Texian forces and believed the campaign was nearly won. Then he made the sort of security decision that makes military historians stare silently at the ceiling. His army camped near the San Jacinto River with poor defensive readiness, relaxed discipline, and dangerously casual attention to the enemy. Sam Houston saw the opening and attacked suddenly in the afternoon. Texian soldiers charged while shouting, "Remember the Alamo," and "Remember Goliad," and the Mexican army was caught completely off guard. The battle was over in about 18 minutes. 18 minutes. That is shorter than many people spend arguing with a delivery app. Santa Anna was captured the next day, and the defeat effectively secured Texan independence. His army did not lose after a long heroic defensive stand. It lost because the enemy was allowed to turn a sleepy camp into a historical speed run. So yes, history is full of brave soldiers, brilliant commanders, and then these guys, the military equivalent of clicking every wrong button in the tutorial. But now, I want to fight in the comments. Which commander here deserves the crown for the dumbest defeat, and which absolute disaster did we criminally leave out? Drop the name below, defend your pick like it is a court case, and if this video made you question human leadership as a species, hit like and subscribe.